The thundering hooves of a lone stallion broke the dusty silence of the western plains as the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold. In the distance, a stagecoach had come to a halt, but something was terribly wrong. A young woman in a torn wedding dress was chained to one of the wheels, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her wrists bloodied from struggling against her bonds. Rachel Andrews had always dreamed of a life of adventure, not the cruel twist of fate that had befallen her on what should have been the happiest day of her life. At 22, she had been promised to Walter Jenkins, a man 30 years her senior with a reputation as cold as his eyes. When she had tried to flee the arranged marriage, his men had caught her, and this was her punishment to be left to the mercy of the elements, wild animals, or whatever outlaw might happen upon her. The lone rider slowed his horse as he approached the abandoned stagecoach. Flynn Blackett, a 30-year-old cowboy with a reputation that preceded him throughout the Wyoming Territory, had been tracking a gang of stage robbers for 3 days. What he found instead made his blood boil. "Please," Rachel called out, her voice hoarse from hours of shouting for help. "Please help me." Flynn dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the dirt. He approached cautiously, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "What happened here, miss?" he asked, tipping his hat back to reveal a weathered face with kind eyes that contrasted with the hard set of his jaw. "My." Rachel swallowed hard, her pride almost preventing her from admitting the truth. "My betrothed did this. I refused to marry him, and this is his idea of teaching me obedience." Flynn's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene. The chains were thick, meant for securing cargo, not for binding delicate wrists. Without another word, he reached for the tools in his saddlebag. "Hold still," he instructed, his voice gentle as he worked at the locks with a set of picks. It took him several minutes of concentration before the first lock gave way with a satisfying click. "Thank you," Rachel whispered, relief washing over her as she felt the pressure ease from one wrist. "Don't thank me yet," Flynn replied, moving to the second lock. "We're still in the middle of nowhere, and if your betrothed is the kind of man who would do this, he's the kind who will come looking for you." As the second lock opened, Rachel collapsed forward, her legs weak from standing for so long. Flynn caught her, steadying her against him. For a moment they remained like that, her head against his chest, his arms around her shoulders. "She's mine," Flynn said suddenly, his voice carrying across the empty plains as if challenging the very air to defy him. "Anyone who wants to claim her will have to go through me." Rachel looked up, startled by his declaration. "I don't belong to anyone," she said firmly, though she made no move to leave his supportive embrace. Flynn's face softened into a smile. "I didn't mean it like that. I meant you're under my protection now. No one's going to chain you up again, not while I'm around." Rachel studied his face, looking for deceit, but found only sincerity. "I don't even know your name." "Flynn Blackett," he replied, helping her to a sitting position on a nearby rock. "And you are Rachel Andrews," she said, massaging her wrists where the chains had cut into them. Flynn tore strips from his own shirt to bandage her wounds. "Well, Miss Andrews, we need to get you somewhere safe. My cabin's about a day's ride from here. You're welcome to stay there until we figure out what to do about your situation." Rachel hesitated. Going with a stranger seemed risky, but staying alone in the wilderness was certain death. "How do I know I can trust you?" Flynn handed her his canteen. "You don't, but I give you my word that I intend you no harm, and out here a man's word is all he's got." Rachel took a sip of water, considering her options. Finally, she nodded. "I'll go with you, Mr. Blackett, but know that I'm not looking for another man to decide my fate." Flynn helped her to her feet. "Fair enough, and it's just Flynn. Mr. Blackett was my father, and he was not a man I care to be compared to." As Flynn helped Rachel onto his horse, the sun had fully set, leaving them in the cool embrace of the night. He mounted behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance despite the close quarters. "Hold on," he instructed, and Rachel gripped the saddle horn as Flynn set the horse into a steady trot, heading west toward the mountains that loomed like sentinels against the starlit sky. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's gait and the soft jingle of tack the only sounds in the vast emptiness around them. Rachel was acutely aware of Flynn's presence behind her, solid and reassuring. "May I ask why you were tracking a stagecoach?" She finally said, breaking the silence. Flynn adjusted his grip on the reins. "I wasn't tracking the coach specifically. I was after the Danvers gang. They've been hitting stages all across the territory. Killed a friend of mine who was riding shotgun last month." "I'm sorry about your friend," Rachel said sincerely. "Appreciated," Flynn replied, "but it's the way of things out here. Life is cheap, especially for those who choose to live by the gun." "Is that what you do, live by the gun?" Flynn was quiet for a moment. "I've done my share of fighting. Rode with the cavalry during the war, then did some work as a bounty hunter. These days, I mostly keep to myself, except when something like the Danvers gang needs dealing with." Rachel pondered this. "So you're not an official lawman?" "No, madam, just a concerned citizen." There was a hint of humor in his voice. "And what will this concerned citizen do with me once we reach his cabin?" Rachel couldn't keep the wariness from her tone. "Feed you, give you a place to rest, and help you get wherever you want to go next," Flynn answered simply. "I'm not in the business of forcing my company on anyone, Miss Andrews." Rachel relaxed slightly at his words. "I appreciate that, and it's just Rachel. Miss Andrews makes me feel like I'm back in my father's house being scolded for some impropriety." Flynn chuckled. "Were you often scolded for improprieties, Rachel?" "More often than not," she admitted with a small laugh of her own. "My father wanted a proper lady for a daughter. Instead, he got me more interested in books about adventure than in learning to pour tea correctly." "Sounds like you've got spirit," Flynn observed. "That's a good thing out here. The West breaks those who don't." They continued riding through the night, stopping occasionally to rest the horse and stretch their legs. Rachel learned that Flynn had been born in Boston but had come west as a boy when his father sought fortune in the gold fields. When that dream failed, as it did for so many, his father had turned to drink and violence. Flynn had left home at 16, lying about his age to join the Union Army. In turn, she told him about growing up in St. Louis, the daughter of a successful merchant who had arranged her marriage to Walter Jenkins, a business associate almost 3 times her age. She had agreed initially, believing it her duty, but when she discovered Jenkins's cruelty to his servants and previous wives, 3 of whom had died under mysterious circumstances, she had tried to break the engagement. "That's when he decided to teach me a lesson," Rachel explained as they sat by a small fire Flynn had built for their pre-dawn rest. "He and his men intercepted the stagecoach I was taking to my aunt's in Denver. Her voice faltered. They killed the driver and guard. Left them for the vultures. Then they chained me to that wheel and told me they'd be back in a day or 2 to collect me if I'd learned my lesson." Flynn's face hardened in the firelight. "Men like that don't deserve to breathe the same air as decent folks." "No," Rachel agreed quietly, "they don't." When they resumed their journey at first light, Rachel found herself leaning back against Flynn more readily, exhaustion and the toll of her ordeal catching up with her. He said nothing but adjusted his arm to support her more securely, allowing her to doze against him as they rode. By midday, they had reached the foothills, and Flynn guided his horse along a barely visible trail that wound through stands of pine and aspen. The air grew cooler as they climbed, and Rachel welcomed the change from the dusty heat of the plains. "Not much farther now," Flynn told her as they rounded a bend. "Cabin's just up ahead in that clearing." Rachel peered through the trees and saw a sturdy log cabin nestled against the hillside. It was small but well built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. A corral stood empty beside it, and a small creek bubbled nearby. "It's lovely," Rachel said, genuine appreciation in her voice. Flynn seemed pleased by her reaction. "It's not much, but it's home. Been working on it for 5 years now." He helped her dismount when they reached the cabin, and Rachel was surprised to find her legs so unsteady. Flynn caught her elbow to steady her. "Easy now," he said. "You've been through a lot. Let's get you inside and rested properly." The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking area beside it. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs stood in the center, and a curtained-off area in the back presumably contained a bed. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, which surprised Rachel. Flynn noticed her looking at the books. "Another impropriety of mine," he said with a wry smile. "My father thought reading was a waste of time for a man." "I think it's wonderful," Rachel replied, running her fingers along the spines. "Thoreau, Whitman, Hawthorne, you have excellent taste." Flynn busied himself starting a fire in the hearth. "Make yourself at home. I'll fix us something to eat, then I need to see to the horse. After that, we can talk about what comes next." Rachel sank into one of the chairs, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the past day. She was safe, at least for the moment, but what would she do now? She couldn't return to St. Louis. Her father would simply hand her back to Jenkins. She had no money of her own, no skills that would earn her a living in a frontier town. Flynn set a bowl of stew in front of her, breaking her reverie. "It's not fancy, but it'll fill you up," he said, taking the seat across from her with his own bowl. "Thank you," Rachel said, realizing how hungry she was as the aroma hit her. "For everything, you didn't have to help me." Flynn looked at her steadily. "Yes, I did. Any decent man would have." "Not many decent men where I come from then," Rachel said with a bitter edge to her voice. They ate in companionable silence for a while before Flynn spoke again. "You mentioned an aunt in Denver. Could you still go to her?" Rachel shook her head. "She's my father's sister." "She'd just send word to him and we'd be back where we started." Flynn considered this. "What about finding work somewhere? Deadwood's booming right now, lots of opportunities for a smart woman." "Doing what? Washing minors' clothes, serving drinks in a saloon?" Rachel's frustration was evident. "I was raised to be ornamental, Mr. Blackett. I can play the piano, arrange flowers, and recite poetry in French. None of that is particularly useful out here." "You can read and write, can't you?" Flynn asked. "Of course. Then you could teach." "Most of these mining towns are desperate for teachers. The pay isn't great, but it's honest work and you'd have your independence." Rachel considered this. "I hadn't thought of that. I do enjoy children." Flynn stood, collecting their empty bowls. "Think on it. There's no rush to decide anything today. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need to sort things out." He disappeared behind the curtain and returned with a bundle of clothing. "These might be a bit large, but they're clean. You can use the creek to wash up if you like." "I'll give you privacy." Rachel accepted the clothes gratefully. Her wedding dress, once beautiful, was now torn and filthy. "Thank you, again." While Flynn tended to his horse, Rachel bathed in the creek, wincing as the cold water touched her injured wrists. The simple act of washing away the dirt and fear of the previous day was remarkably restorative. She changed into the offered clothing, a cotton shirt and trousers that she had to cinch tightly at the waist, and used a strip of fabric from her ruined dress to tie back her long auburn hair. When she returned to the cabin, Flynn had just finished unsaddling his horse in the corral. He looked up as she approached, and something in his expression made her self-conscious. "I must look ridiculous," she said, gesturing to the 2 large clothes. Flynn shook his head. "Not at all, you look right somehow, like you belong out here." The compliment, so different from the shallow praise of her appearance she was accustomed to, warmed Rachel in a way she hadn't expected. She helped Flynn carry water from the creek and gather wood for the fire, working alongside him with a natural ease that surprised them both. As evening fell, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple. Flynn had offered her his bed, saying he would sleep by the fire, but that was a concern for later. For now, the peace of the moment was enough. "Tell me about your life before all this," Flynn said, gesturing vaguely at the wilderness around them. Rachel smiled faintly. "It seems so distant now." "I was raised to be a lady, as I said. My mother died when I was young, so my father and governesses saw to my education. I excelled at my studies, which pleased my father until he realized it made me less marriageable. Men don't want wives who might outsmart them, you see." Flynn snorted. "Sounds like they're afraid of a fair fight." "Perhaps," Rachel agreed. "In any case, I was considered somewhat of a spinster at 22, having turned down several suitors my father deemed appropriate. Then Mr. Jenkins came along, recently widowed and looking for a new wife." My father was deep in debt to him, as it turned out, and I was the payment. Flynn's expression darkened. That's not marriage, that's trafficking. Yes, well, that's the world I come from, Rachel said with resignation. When I learned what kind of man Jenkins truly was, I couldn't go through with it. I stole money from my father's safe, my mother's inheritance that he had always kept from me, and bought passage on the Stagecoach. You know the rest. Flynn was quiet for a moment. You're very brave, you know. Many would have submitted rather than face the unknown. Rachel looked at him, surprised by the respect in his voice. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified most of the time. That's what makes it courage, Flynn said simply, doing what needs doing despite the fear. They sat in silence as the stars began to appear, countless pinpricks of light in the vast canvas of the sky. Rachel felt a strange peace settling over her despite the uncertainty of her situation. What about you? She asked eventually. How did you end up here alone in the wilderness? Flynn leaned back in his chair, his face half in shadow. After the war, I drifted, did some ranch work, some bounty hunting, rode with a marshal for a while. I was good with a gun, too good, maybe. It's easy to fall into that life, letting the reputation carry you. But it eats at you, taking lives, even if they're men who deserve killing. He paused, and Rachel waited, sensing there was more to the story. There was a woman once, Flynn continued softly. Mary was her name. She ran a boarding house in Cheyenne. We were going to get married. But she was killed during a bank robbery. Wrong place, wrong time. I'm so sorry, Rachel said, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. Flynn nodded acknowledgement. After that, I couldn't stomach the towns anymore. Too many people, too much noise. I found this place, built the cabin, and have been here ever since. Just me and the occasional trip for supplies or when there's trouble that needs handling. Don't you get lonely? Rachel asked. Flynn considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But I've got my books, and the mountains are good company if you learn to listen to them. Rachel found herself studying his profile in the gathering darkness, struck by the quiet strength he radiated. Here was a man who had seen the worst of humanity, but hadn't let it destroy his capacity for kindness. We should head inside, Flynn said eventually, rising from his chair. Gets cold up here at night. Inside the cabin, he built up the fire and showed Rachel to the curtained area where a simple but clean bed waited. Despite her protests, he insisted she take it while he made a pallet near the hearth. I've slept on worse, he assured her. Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning. Rachel was too exhausted to argue further. She slipped behind the curtain and lay down, listening to Flynn moving about the cabin, the familiar domestic sounds oddly comforting. Despite everything, she felt safe for the first time in longer than she could remember, and sleep claimed her quickly. She awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of rain pattering on the roof. For a moment, she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She sat up, listening, and heard Flynn moving around in the main room of the cabin. Pushing aside the curtain, she found him at the stove, frying bacon in a cast iron pan. He looked up as she emerged. Morning, he greeted her. Sleep well? Rachel nodded, running a hand through her tangled hair. Better than I expected to. What time is it? Just past 7, Flynn replied, sliding the bacon onto a plate. I'd have let you sleep longer, but I figured you might be hungry. Starving, actually, Rachel admitted, accepting the plate he handed her. They ate breakfast at the table, the rain creating a cozy atmosphere inside the cabin. Flynn explained that the weather would likely keep them cabin-bound for the day. We're in for a proper mountain storm, he said, glancing out the window. Good thing we made it back when we did. Rachel followed his gaze to the window, where she could see the rain coming down in sheets, the trees bending in the wind. Will it last long? Hard to say. Could be a few hours, could be a couple of days. Mountain weather is unpredictable. The prospect of being confined with this man she barely knew should have been alarming, but Rachel found she wasn't concerned. Something about Flynn's steady presence put her at ease. They spent the morning in comfortable productivity. Flynn showed Rachel his small library, and she selected a volume of Whitman to read while he worked on mending a pair of boots. The rain continued unabated, drumming on the roof and streaming down the windows. By afternoon, the monotony had Rachel feeling restless. She put down her book and wandered to the window, watching the curtains of rain sweep across the clearing. "Getting cabin fever already?" Flynn asked, looking up from his work. "A little," Rachel admitted. "I'm not used to being idle." Flynn set aside the boot he was repairing. "I could teach you to play poker, or we could just talk." Rachel turned from the window. "Let's talk. I want to know more about this place, about your life here." Flynn leaned back in his chair. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Rachel said, sitting across from him. "How you built this cabin, how you survive the winters, what you do when you're not rescuing damsels in distress." Flynn laughed, a warm sound that Rachel found she liked very much. "That last one doesn't happen as often as you might think." He told her about building the cabin with help from a few friends, about hunting and trapping, about the long winter months when the snow could pile up to the windowsills. He spoke of the beauty of the mountains in every season, of the wildlife that shared his domain, of the simple rhythm of life dictated by nature rather than society's demands. Rachel listened, entranced. The life he described was harder in many ways than the one she had known, but also richer, more authentic. She found herself asking questions, eager to understand this world so different from her own. As the day wore on, their conversation shifted to more personal territory. Rachel told Flynn about the books she loved, the dreams she had harbored as a young girl, the gradual disillusionment as she realized the narrow confines of the life laid out for her. "I used to imagine running away to become an explorer," she confessed. "I read all of Lewis and Clark's journals and fancied myself discovering new territories." "Why didn't you?" Flynn asked. Rachel looked at him in surprise. "Women don't do such things." "Some do," Flynn countered. "I've met a few women out here who have carved their own paths." "It's not easy, but it's possible." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying to Rachel. Could she really forge a life on her own terms? As evening approached, the rain finally began to ease. Flynn prepared a simple dinner and they ate by lamplight, the conversation flowing easily between them. Rachel was struck by how comfortable she felt in his presence, how natural it seemed to be sharing this small space with him. After dinner, Flynn produced a battered deck of cards. "Still interested in learning poker?" Rachel grinned. "Absolutely. But don't expect me to bet my wedding ring it's probably still on that Stagecoach wheel." Flynn dealt the cards, explaining the rules as they played. Rachel proved to be a quick study, and soon they were engaged in a spirited game, using matches as betting chips. "You're either very lucky or a natural card sharp," Flynn observed as Rachel won her third hand in a row. "Perhaps a bit of both," she replied with a mischievous smile. "My father would be scandalized to see me now, playing cards with a man unchaperoned, wearing trousers no less." "Scandalous indeed," Flynn agreed, his eyes twinkling. "Next thing you know, you'll be riding astride instead of side saddle." "I've never actually ridden at all," Rachel admitted. "Another thing proper ladies aren't encouraged to do, at least not with any spirit." Flynn looked genuinely shocked. "Never? Well, that's something we'll have to remedy if you're going to survive out here." "Are you offering to teach me?" Rachel asked, suddenly serious. Flynn met her gaze steadily. "I'm offering to help you in any way I can, Rachel. Whether that's teaching you to ride, helping you get to a town where you can start fresh, or—" He hesitated. "Or," Rachel prompted, "or giving you a place to stay for as long as you want one," Flynn finished quietly. The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to voice. Rachel looked down at her cards, her heart racing. "Thank you," she said finally. "I don't know what I want yet, but I appreciate having options." Flynn nodded, accepting her non-answer. "Your play," he said, returning to the game. They played a few more hands before fatigue overtook them both. As they prepared for sleep, a new awkwardness crept in, born of growing awareness of each other. "Good night, Rachel," Flynn said as she disappeared behind the curtain. "Good night, Flynn," she replied softly, "and thank you for everything." The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Rachel woke to find Flynn already outside, tending to his horse. She joined him in the corral, watching as he brushed the animal's glossy coat. "He's beautiful," she said, admiring the strong lines of the buckskin stallion. "This is Thunder," Flynn introduced, patting the horse's neck. Best friend a man could ask for out here, reliable, smart, and doesn't talk back much, Rachel laughed. A perfect companion then. Flynn finished grooming the horse and turned to Rachel. I meant what I said last night about teaching you to ride. No time like the present if you're willing. Rachel hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd like that. Flynn's face lit up with a smile that transformed his features, making him look younger, less careworn. Let's have some breakfast first, then we'll start with the basics. After a hearty meal, Flynn led Rachel and Thunder to a small meadow near the cabin. He spent the morning teaching her how to approach a horse, how to communicate with the animal through touch and voice, how to saddle and bridle properly. Rachel was an attentive student, eager to learn and unafraid to ask questions. When it came time to actually mount, Flynn stood close, his hands at her waist to steady her. Just put your foot in the stirrup and swing up, he instructed. I won't let you fall, Rachel did as he said, surprised by how easily she settled into the saddle. Flynn adjusted the stirrups for her shorter legs, then handed her the reins, showing her how to hold them correctly. How does it feel? He asked, looking up at her. Strange, Rachel admitted. But good, I feel. Tall, Flynn laughed. You'll get used to it. Now let's teach you the basics of control. He walked beside her as she guided Thunder around the meadow, explaining how to use the reins, how to signal with her legs, how to move with the horse rather than against it. Rachel was a natural, quickly gaining confidence as she mastered the fundamentals. You're doing great, Flynn encouraged as she completed her third circuit of the meadow without his guidance. Want to try a trot? Rachel nodded eagerly, and Flynn showed her how to urge Thunder into a faster pace. The transition was jarring at first, and she clutched the saddle horn for balance. Relax your body, Flynn called. Move with him like you're dancing together. Rachel tried to follow his advice, gradually finding the rhythm of the horse's movement. A sense of exhilaration swept through her as she and Thunder moved as one across the meadow, the wind in her hair, the powerful animal responding to her subtle commands. When she finally drew to a halt near Flynn, she was breathless with excitement, her cheeks flushed and eyes bright. That was amazing, she exclaimed. I've never felt anything like it. Flynn's expression as he helped her dismount was one of pure delight, reflecting her own joy. You're a natural, Rachel. With a little more practice, you'll be ready for longer rides. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and Rachel found herself reluctant to step away. They stood close, the horse forgotten as something electric sparked between them. Flynn was the first to break the moment, clearing his throat and taking a step back. We should get Thunder cooled down and brushed, he said, his voice slightly rough. They walked back to the cabin leading the horse, a new awareness humming between them. As they worked together to care for Thunder, their hands occasionally brushed, each brief contact sending a jolt through Rachel that she tried to ignore. The day passed quickly, filled with more riding lessons and shared chores. By evening, Rachel's muscles ached pleasantly from the unaccustomed activity, and she moved with a new confidence born of accomplishment. They sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset and talking easily about everything and nothing. Flynn spoke of his plans to expand the corral, perhaps add a few more horses. Rachel shared stories from her childhood, the rare happy memories of times before her mother's death had cast a shadow over her home. My father wasn't always so driven by social climbing, she explained. When my mother was alive, he laughed more, cared less about appearances. After she died, it was as if he channeled all his grief into ambition. Flynn nodded, understanding. Loss changes people, not always for the better. What about you? Rachel asked gently. How did losing Mary change you? Flynn was quiet for a long moment. It made me withdraw, I suppose. I'd already seen enough death in the war to last several lifetimes, but hers, it was senseless. Made me question what kind of world we live in where someone so good could be taken so randomly. Is that why you came up here? To escape that world, partly, Flynn admitted. But also to find something worth holding on to. There's an honesty to this life. The mountains don't lie, the seasons don't betray you. What you see is what you get. Rachel studied his profile in the fading light. And is it enough? This solitary existence, Flynn turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. It has been, until now. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Rachel felt her heart quicken, aware that they were approaching a precipice. Part of her wanted to retreat to safer ground, but another part, the part that had defied her father and fled a forced marriage, urged her forward. "What's changed?" she asked softly, though she knew the answer. Flynn's gaze held her steadily. "You know what's changed, Rachel." Before she could respond, a distant sound caught Flynn's attention. He tensed, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. "Get inside," he said, his voice suddenly hard. Now, Rachel stood, alarmed by the transformation. "What is it?" "Riders," Flynn said grimly, "and they're coming fast." "Could be nothing, but I don't like coincidences." Rachel didn't need to be told twice. She hurried into the cabin while Flynn retrieved his rifle from just inside the door. Through the window, she watched as he took up a position at the corner of the porch, partially concealed but with a clear view of the trail leading to the cabin. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and Rachel's heart hammered in her chest. Had Jenkins found her already? How would he have tracked her here? Minutes later, 3 riders emerged from the trees. Even from a distance, Rachel recognized the lead rider, Walter Jenkins, his corpulent frame unmistakable even on horseback. The 2 men flanking him were his personal guards, the same ones who had chained her to the stagecoach. Flynn remained perfectly still as the riders approached, only the slight adjustment of his rifle betraying his readiness. Jenkins drew his horse to a halt about 20 yards from the cabin. "Hello, the house," he called. "I'm looking for a young woman, a runaway bride, red hair, green eyes, answers to Rachel Andrews. She's my fiancée and I'm concerned for her safety." Flynn didn't move from his position. "No women here," he called back, "just me." "You're welcome to water your horses at the creek, but then I'd appreciate you moving on. I value my privacy." Jenkins studied the cabin, his eyes narrowing. "Mind if we take a look around? She might have passed this way without your knowledge. Dangerous for a woman alone in these parts." "I mind very much," Flynn replied, his tone conversational but with an edge of steel beneath. "As I said, there's no one here but me, and trespassing is a good way to get shot in these mountains." One of Jenkins's men reached for his gun, but Jenkins stopped him with a raised hand. Now, no need for hostilities. We're just concerned citizens looking for a lost young lady." "If she's lost, it's because she wants to be," Flynn responded. "Best respect her wishes and move on." Jenkins's false affability hardened into something ugly. "She's my property, mister. We had a contract, her father and I. I don't take kindly to having my belongings stolen." Flynn stepped fully into view now, his rifle pointed casually but unmistakably in Jenkins's direction. "Women aren't property, and I suggest you reconsider your choice of words and actions very carefully." The tension crackled in the air as the 2 men stared each other down. Rachel watched from the window, her heart in her throat. She knew Flynn was putting himself in danger for her sake, and the thought both terrified and moved her. Finally, Jenkins broke the standoff with a cold laugh. "We'll be back, friend, with more men, and we'll search every inch of these mountains if we have to." "Your choice," Flynn said evenly, "but you won't like the welcome you receive." Jenkins wheeled his horse around, gesturing for his men to follow. As they rode away, Flynn remained on the porch until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. When he came inside, his face was grim. Rachel stood in the middle of the room, trembling slightly. "How did they find me?" she whispered. Flynn set his rifle against the wall. "Probably asked at every settlement between here and where I found you. 3 riders asking questions get noticed." "They'll come back," Rachel said, her voice hollow. "Just like he said." Flynn nodded. "Yes, they will, which means we need to make a decision, and quickly." "We could run," Rachel suggested. "Go to one of those mining towns you mentioned." "We could," Flynn agreed, "but Jenkins strikes me as the persistent type. He'd follow and he'd bring trouble with him. Innocent people could get hurt." "Then what do we do?" Flynn's expression was resolute. "We make a stand, but first we need allies." He moved to a trunk in the corner of the cabin and began pulling out supplies, ammunition, a second revolver, provisions. "There's a Shoshone settlement about half a day's ride from here," he explained as he worked. "Chief Grey Wolf and his people are friends of mine. I've done them some favors in the past and they owe me. With their help, we can set a trap for Jenkins and his men. Rachel watched him, a mixture of fear and determination coursing through her. You're willing to fight for me. You barely know me. Flynn paused in his preparations, looking at her directly. I know enough, Rachel. I know you're brave and intelligent and deserve to make your own choices in life. I know that men like Jenkins need to be taught that they can't own people. And I know that in the short time you've been here, you've reminded me what it feels like to care about something beyond just surviving. His words touched something deep within Rachel, a place that had been closed off for so long she'd almost forgotten it existed. In that moment, she knew she would fight alongside him, whatever came. What do you need me to do? She asked. Flynn's expression softened with approval. First, learn to use this, he said, holding out the second revolver. I hope you won't need it, but I want you prepared. Rachel took the gun, feeling its weight in her hand. Show me. For the next hour, Flynn taught her the basics of handling the weapon, how to load it, aim it, and most importantly, when to use it. Only as a last resort, he emphasized. A gun is a responsibility, not a solution. Rachel nodded, taking his instructions seriously. By the time they finished, she could hit a can placed on a stump at 10 paces, not expert marksmanship, but enough to defend herself if necessary. As they prepared for bed, the reality of their situation settled over them like a weight. Flynn insisted Rachel take the bed again, but this time she protested more vigorously. You need proper rest more than I do, she argued. You're the one who will be riding to the Shoshone settlement tomorrow. All the more reason for you to be well rested too, Flynn countered. You'll be coming with me. I'm not leaving you here alone, not with Jenkins and his men in the area. The thought of facing a Native American settlement was intimidating, but not as frightening as being left alone with Jenkins possibly returning. Rachel finally agreed to the sleeping arrangements, though she felt guilty taking the more comfortable bed when Flynn was doing so much for her. As she lay awake that night, listening to Flynn's steady breathing from the other side of the curtain, Rachel reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few days. From a reluctant bride to a woman learning to shoot, ride, and fight for her freedom, it was almost unbelievable. More unbelievable still were the feelings growing within her for the quiet, principled man who had rescued her. In the short time they had known each other, Flynn had shown her more respect and kindness than any man in her previous life. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, and supported her independence even while protecting her. It was a heady combination, and Rachel found herself imagining what life might be like if she stayed here in this cabin with Flynn. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. Was she simply transferring her dependence from one man to another? Or was this something different, something based on mutual respect rather than ownership? Morning came too quickly, gray light filtering through the cabin windows as Flynn moved about, preparing for their journey. Rachel dressed quickly in the clothes he had provided, now feeling natural in the practical garments. They ate a hasty breakfast, then Flynn helped Rachel saddle Thunder. He had a second horse, a sturdy mare named Sadie that he kept in a smaller corral behind the cabin. She's gentle but sure-footed, Flynn explained as he prepared the mare for Rachel to ride. Perfect for a beginner on mountain trails. Rachel approached the horse confidently, remembering Flynn's lessons from the day before. Sadie nuzzled her hand, accepting her immediately, which Flynn said was a good sign. Animals are better judges of character than most people, he observed. Sadie doesn't take to just anyone. They set out as the sun crested the mountains, following a narrow trail that wound deeper into the wilderness. Flynn rode slightly ahead, alert for any signs of danger, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife to Rachel. Despite the seriousness of their mission, Rachel couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration as they traveled. The mountains were breathtakingly beautiful, the air crisp and clean, the forest alive with sounds and movements. For someone who had spent her life in drawing rooms and ballrooms, the raw natural world was intoxicating. "How are you doing back there?" Flynn called over his shoulder after they had been riding for several hours. "Wonderfully," Rachel replied truthfully, "though I suspect I'll be sore tomorrow." Flynn grinned. That's the price of adventure. Worth every ache, Rachel assured him. They stopped at midday beside a small stream to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Flynn pointed out tracks in the soft earth near the water deer rabbit and what he identified as mountain lion. The Shoshone camp is just over that ridge, he told her, gesturing to a distant hill. We should reach it by mid-afternoon. Rachel nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. What can I expect? How will they receive us? With caution at first, Flynn answered honestly. They've had mixed experiences with white settlers, but Grey Wolf knows me and they value honesty. Tell the truth about your situation, show respect for their ways, and you'll be fine. As they prepared to resume their journey, Flynn suddenly stilled, his head tilted in a listening posture that Rachel was coming to recognize. What is it? She whispered. Not sure, Flynn murmured, drawing his revolver. Get behind that boulder quickly. Rachel obeyed, leading Sadie with her as Flynn positioned thunder between them and the direction from which they had come. Moments later, she heard what had alerted Flynn, the distant sound of horses moving through the underbrush. Flynn crouched beside her, his expression grim. Could be Jenkins and his men, could be just travelers. Either way, better safe than sorry. They waited in tense silence as the sounds grew closer. Rachel clutched the revolver Flynn had given her, hoping she wouldn't need to use it, but prepared to if necessary. The brush parted and two riders emerged, not Jenkins and his men, but a Shoshone man and woman. Flynn visibly relaxed, holstering his weapon. Running Elk, he called in greeting, standing and raising his hand in a gesture of peace. Good to see you, my friend. The Shoshone man returned the gesture, his face breaking into a smile of recognition. Hawkeye, he replied, using what Rachel assumed was Flynn's name among the Shoshone. It has been many moons. Flynn approached the riders and Rachel followed cautiously. Running Elk dismounted, as did his companion, a young woman with intelligent eyes who regarded Rachel with open curiosity. This is my wife, Mourning Dove, Running Elk introduced. And you have brought a new friend, I see, Flynn nodded. This is Rachel Andrews. Rachel, Running Elk is Grey Wolf's son and one of the finest trackers in the mountains. Rachel offered a respectful nod, which Mourning Dove returned with a small smile. We were on our way to speak with Grey Wolf, Flynn explained. Rachel is in danger from a man who believes he owns her. I hoped your people might help us. Running Elk's expression grew serious. My father will hear your story. Come, we will take you to our camp. The four rode together, Running Elk and Flynn leading the way, with Rachel and Mourning Dove following. The Shoshone woman moved her horse alongside Rachel's, studying her with frank interest. You are far from your people, Mourning Dove observed in accented but clear English. Yes, Rachel agreed. Very far. And Hawkeye protects you? Rachel glanced ahead at Flynn's straight back. We protect each other, I hope, Mourning Dove nodded, seeming to approve of this answer. He is a good man, honorable, my people trust him. How did he earn the name Hawkeye? Rachel asked, curious about this aspect of Flynn she hadn't yet discovered. Mourning Dove smiled. For his vision, both with eyes and with heart. He sees what others miss, and he sees people for who they truly are, not just their skin or their dress. The explanation fit Flynn perfectly, Rachel thought. He had seen her, truly seen her, when everyone else in her life had viewed her as merely an object to be traded or possessed. They crested the ridge Flynn had pointed out earlier, and Rachel gasped at the sight below. A circle of tippies stood in a protected valley, smoke rising from cooking fires, people moving about in their daily activities. It was like something from the adventure books she had read as a child, yet real and vital. As they descended toward the camp, people looked up at their approach. Children ran forward, calling out to Running Elk and Mourning Dove, then hanging back shyly when they noticed the strangers. In the center of the camp, an older man emerged from the largest tipi. Even at a distance, his bearing marked him as a leader, tall and straight-backed despite his years, with a face etched by experience and wisdom. Chief Grey Wolf, Flynn said quietly to Rachel. Remember honesty and respect. They dismounted at the edge of the camp, and Running Elk led them to where the chief waited. Flynn approached first, raising his hand in the same greeting he had used with running elk. "Hawkeye," Gray Wolf said, his voice deep and measured. "You return to us with troubled spirits following your trail," Flynn nodded. "You see clearly as always, my friend. I come seeking your wisdom and help." Gray Wolf's gaze shifted to Rachel, assessing her without judgment. "And this woman, she brings the trouble." "The trouble follows her but is not of her making," Flynn corrected gently. Gray Wolf considered this, then gestured toward his tipi. "Come, we will talk inside where the spirits of our ancestors can hear and guide us." Rachel followed Flynn and the chief into the tipi, aware of the eyes of the entire camp upon them. Inside, a small fire burned in a central pit, the smoke rising to an opening at the top of the structure. Gray Wolf seated himself on one side of the fire and indicated that they should sit opposite him. Once they were settled, Gray Wolf filled a pipe and offered it first to the four directions, then to Flynn, who took a ceremonial puff before passing it back. "Now," Gray Wolf said when the ritual was complete, "tell me of this trouble that follows like a shadow." Flynn looked to Rachel, silently encouraging her to speak for herself. She took a deep breath and began her story, telling it simply and honestly: her arranged marriage to Jenkins, her discovery of his true nature, her escape attempt and capture, and finally Flynn's rescue and Jenkins's pursuit. Gray Wolf listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. When Rachel finished, he turned to Flynn. "And you, Hawkeye, why do you involve yourself in this woman's trouble?" Flynn met the chief's gaze steadily. "Because it is right, and because—" He hesitated, glancing at Rachel. "Because in helping her, I have found something I thought was lost to me." Gray Wolf nodded slowly, as if Flynn had confirmed something he already suspected. "The man who pursues her, he is wealthy, powerful in the white man's way." "Yes," Flynn confirmed. "And dangerous. He'll bring men guns. And if he finds her not, he will blame my people," Gray Wolf stated, not a question but a certainty born of long experience with white settlers. "I won't let that happen," Flynn promised. "We can set a trap, draw him away from your camp, deal with him without endangering your people." Gray Wolf was silent for a long moment, contemplating the fire. Finally, he looked up, his decision made. "My son will help you prepare this trap. Morning Dove will take the woman to the sacred caves, where she will be safe until the danger has passed." Rachel glanced at Flynn, alarmed at the thought of separation. He reached over, briefly touching her hand in reassurance. "Gray Wolf's wisdom is sound," he told her. "The caves are well hidden, and Morning Dove is a skilled hunter and healer. You'll be safer there than with us when Jenkins arrives." Though reluctant, Rachel understood the logic. "Thank you for your help," she said to Gray Wolf. "I won't forget your kindness to a stranger." The chief studied her with penetrating eyes. "You have a strong spirit, like the river that carves its own path through stone. Such spirits find their way, even in darkness." They emerged from the tipi to find the camp already in motion, preparing for the coming conflict. Morning Dove approached Rachel, holding out a bundle of clothing. "These will help you blend with the forest," she explained. "We leave soon, before the sun touches the mountain." Rachel accepted the garments gratefully. Flynn drew her aside while Morning Dove waited at a discreet distance. "I don't like being separated from you," Rachel admitted quietly. Flynn's face was serious. "Nor I from you, but it's the safest way. Jenkins wants you, not me. If he believes you're elsewhere, he'll leave these people in peace." "And what about you?" Rachel asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "Jenkins isn't a man who takes kindly to interference." Flynn's expression softened. "I've handled worse than Walter Jenkins. Trust me, Rachel, this will end tomorrow one way or another, and then you'll be truly free to choose your own path." The way he said it, not assuming she would stay with him, but acknowledging her right to decide for herself, made Rachel's heart ache with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper she wasn't yet ready to name. "Be careful," she whispered, impulsively reaching up to touch his cheek. "I've only just found you. I'm not ready to lose you." Flynn caught her hand, pressing it briefly against his face before releasing it. "You won't lose me, I promise." The moment was interrupted by Running Elk's approach. "Hawkeye, we must prepare." My scouts report the white men are camped by the Twin Rocks, less than half a day's journey from here. Flynn nodded, his demeanor shifting to that of a strategist. We'll need to move quickly then. Rachel, go with Morning Dove. I'll come for you when it's safe. Rachel wanted to say more, to somehow express all that was in her heart, but there was no time. She could only nod and turn to follow Morning Dove, who was already moving toward the edge of the camp. As they disappeared into the forest, Rachel looked back once to see Flynn deep in conversation with Running Elk and several other Shoshone warriors, planning the confrontation to come. She sent up a silent prayer for his safety, then focused on keeping pace with Morning Dove, who moved through the forest with the silent grace of one born to it. They traveled for several hours, climbing steadily higher into the mountains. Morning Dove set a challenging pace, but Rachel was determined not to slow them down. Her muscles protested the unaccustomed exertion, but she ignored the discomfort, driven by the knowledge that every step took her farther from Jenkins and closer to safety. As dusk approached, Morning Dove led them to a narrow cleft in a seemingly solid rock face. Following the Shoshone woman, Rachel squeezed through the opening to find herself in a large cave, the ceiling rising high above them, the air cool and still. "We will stay here tonight," Morning Dove explained, setting down her pack. "Tomorrow we go to the sacred caves deeper in the mountain." She showed Rachel how to gather certain plants that grew at the cave entrance, which when burned would hide their scent from any tracking dogs Jenkins might have brought. They prepared a small meal from provisions Morning Dove had brought, eating in companionable silence as night fell outside their shelter. "You care for Hawkeye," Morning Dove observed suddenly as they sat by their tiny fire. Rachel didn't bother denying it. "Yes, more than I expected to." "And he for you. I see it in his eyes when he looks at you, like a man who has found water after long thirst." The poetic description touched Rachel. "We've known each other such a short time. Is it possible to care so deeply so quickly?" Morning Dove smiled. "The heart knows its own mind. Time is a white man's concern. For my people, the truth of feelings matters more than how long they have existed." Rachel pondered this wisdom as they prepared their sleeping places on opposite sides of the fire. Despite her physical exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she worried about Flynn, about the confrontation to come, about what future awaited her when this was all over. Dawn found her still wakeful, rising without complaint when Morning Dove stirred. They ate a hurried breakfast, then continued their journey deeper into the mountains. The sacred caves, when they reached them by midday, were unlike anything Rachel had ever seen. A series of interconnected chambers, some small and intimate, others vast enough to house the entire Shoshone camp. They were adorned with ancient paintings depicting hunts, ceremonies, and spirit visions. "My ancestors have come to these caves for many generations," Morning Dove explained as they settled in a medium-sized chamber with a small underground spring. "The spirits protect those who enter with respect." Rachel hoped the spirits' protection extended to Flynn and the others preparing to face Jenkins. As if reading her thoughts, Morning Dove touched her arm. "Hawkeye is clever and brave. He will return to you." Rachel nodded, trying to believe it with the same certainty Morning Dove expressed. "Tell me about him," she requested. "How did you and your people come to know him?" Morning Dove settled cross-legged by the spring, inviting Rachel to join her. "It was 3 winters ago. A group of white trappers came to our winter camp, drunk on firewater and looking for women. Hawkeye was hunting nearby and heard the commotion. He drove them away, took a bullet in his shoulder doing so." "He never mentioned that," Rachel said, though it didn't surprise her that Flynn would intervene to protect others. "He stayed with us while healing, learned our language, our ways. Helped us negotiate with the Indian agent when the government wanted to move us to a reservation far from our ancestral lands. Because of him, we were allowed to stay in these mountains." The story added new dimensions to Rachel's understanding of Flynn, his respect for other cultures, his willingness to stand against injustice regardless of who was affected, his modesty about his own good deeds. They spent the day in the caves, Morning Dove teaching Rachel about Shoshone traditions and beliefs. The activity helped distract Rachel from her worries, though they never entirely left her mind. As evening approached, they prepared a small meal from their supplies. Rachel was helping Mourning Dove sort medicinal herbs when a distant sound echoed through the cave's footsteps approaching. Both women tensed, Mourning Dove reaching for her knife while Rachel moved toward the small revolver Flynn had given her, which lay within reach. The footsteps grew louder, then a familiar voice called out, "Rachel, Mourning Dove." "Flynn," Rachel exclaimed, rushing toward the sound. He appeared at the entrance to their chamber, looking tired but unharmed, and Rachel didn't hesitate to throw herself into his arms. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair for a moment before he collected himself and stepped back, though he kept one hand on her shoulder as if unwilling to break contact completely. "It's over," he told her, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Jenkins won't trouble you again." "Is he?" Rachel couldn't quite bring herself to ask if Flynn had killed him. Flynn shook his head, understanding her unspoken question. "He's alive, though his pride is considerably wounded. We captured him and his men, disarmed them, and sent them back to town with a clear message that you are under the protection of both the Shoshone people and myself, and any further pursuit would end much less pleasantly for them." Relief flooded through Rachel. Though Jenkins deserved punishment for his actions, she hadn't wanted his death on Flynn's conscience. Mourning Dove had quietly slipped away, giving them privacy for their reunion. Flynn led Rachel to sit beside the spring, keeping her hand in his. "Are you truly unharmed?" Rachel asked, searching his face for any signs of injury. "A few scrapes, nothing more," Flynn assured her. "Jenkins and his men weren't expecting an ambush. We had the advantage of surprise and numbers." "And now?" Rachel asked, the question encompassing all the uncertainty of her situation. Flynn's expression grew serious. "Now you're free, Rachel, truly free to decide what you want." "What I want," Rachel repeated softly, looking down at their joined hands. "I've never really been asked that before." "I'm asking," Flynn said simply. Rachel took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want to not be afraid anymore. I want to learn and grow and be useful. I want—" She hesitated, then looked directly into Flynn's eyes. "I want to stay with you if you'll have me." The hope that bloomed on Flynn's face was beautiful to behold. "I was hoping you'd say that," he admitted. "These past days with you have been the most alive I've felt in years. But I need you to be sure, Rachel, life up here isn't easy. It's beautiful but harsh, far from the comforts you're used to." "Comforts without freedom aren't comforts at all," Rachel replied. "I've had enough of gilded cages. I want open skies, even with all the storms they might bring." Flynn reached up to touch her cheek gently. "I can promise you this: you'll never be owned, never be chained again. Whatever life we build together will be as equals." "That's all I ask," Rachel whispered. "That and this." She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. Flynn responded immediately, his arms encircling her, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened from tentative to certain. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I think I've been waiting for you without knowing it," he murmured. "Ever since I built that cabin, it never quite felt like home until you were in it." Rachel smiled, her heart full. "Then let's go home, Flynn." They spent the night in the caves, accepting the Shoshone's hospitality before beginning their journey back to Flynn's cabin the next morning. Grey Wolf blessed their union in a traditional ceremony, surprising Rachel with his ready acceptance of her into their extended circle of friendship. "You have a good heart," he told her, "and you make Hawkeye's spirit soar. That is enough for us to call you friend." The ride back to the cabin was filled with plans and dreams. Flynn spoke of expanding the cabin, adding rooms, perhaps starting a small horse breeding operation. Rachel shared her ideas for a garden, for possibly offering teaching services to nearby settlements, for learning more about the medicinal plants Mourning Dove had introduced her to. When they crested the final ridge and the cabin came into view, Rachel felt a surge of emotion. This small structure nestled against the mountainside represented everything she had never known. She wanted freedom, purpose, partnership with a man who valued her mind as much as her heart. Flynn helped her dismount when they reached the cabin, But instead of leading the horses to the corral, he turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Before we go inside," he said, his expression earnest, "I want to ask you properly. Not because I think I have any right to claim you, but because I want to pledge myself to you as completely as I know how." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, his eyes never leaving hers. "Rachel Andrews, will you marry me? Not as my possession, but as my partner, my equal, my heart's companion for whatever years were granted." Tears sprang to Rachel's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, Flynn Blackett, I will marry you." Flynn rose and swept her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt of his feelings. When they finally separated, both laughing and breathless, he looked toward the cabin. "Shall we?" he asked, gesturing toward their future home. Rachel nodded, but as Flynn turned to lead the horses to the corral, a thought struck her. "Flynn," she called, making him look back, "when you found me chained to that stagecoach wheel and said she's mine, did you mean it then the way you mean it now?" Flynn considered the question seriously. "Not consciously," he admitted. "But something in me recognized something in you even then, like my soul knew yours somehow." Rachel smiled, content with his answer. "I felt it too. Even through my fear, I knew you were different from any man I'd ever known." They settled into life at the cabin with surprising ease, as if they had always been meant to share this space, this life. Flynn taught Rachel more about riding, hunting, and survival in the wilderness. In turn, she brought warmth and new perspectives to his solitary existence, challenging his thinking and broadening his horizons. They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony attended by Grey Wolf and his family, along with a few trusted friends of Flynn's from nearby settlements. Rachel wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, adorned with beadwork Mourning Dove had taught her to create. As they spoke their vows beneath the vast Wyoming sky, Rachel reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here from a woman chained and abandoned to one who stood proudly beside the man she loved, free to choose her own destiny. That night, as they lay together in the expanded bed Flynn had built for them, Rachel traced the contours of his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Happy?" Flynn asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "More than I knew was possible," Rachel replied honestly. "Though I'm still not entirely convinced this isn't all a dream, that I won't wake up back in St. Louis, being fitted for a wedding dress I don't want to wear." Flynn pulled her closer. "If it's a dream, then we're sharing it, and I have no intention of waking up." "Nor I," Rachel agreed, resting her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. In the years that followed, their life together flourished. Flynn's horse breeding business grew successful, attracting buyers from as far as Denver and Cheyenne. Rachel started a small school that served both settler and Shoshone children, teaching not only reading and arithmetic, but also respect for different cultures and traditions. They built a larger cabin, though they kept the original as a cherished part of their property. They weathered harsh winters, summer droughts, and occasional conflicts with less friendly neighbors, drawing strength from each other through every challenge. 5 years after their wedding, Rachel gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Flynn's mother. 2 years later, a son joined their family, named Gray after the Shoshone chief who had become like a grandfather to their children. On the 10th anniversary of the day Flynn had found Rachel chained to the stagecoach wheel, they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard with Running Elk and Mourning Dove's children who were visiting for the summer. "Do you ever regret it?" Flynn asked suddenly. "Choosing this life instead of returning to civilization?" Rachel looked at him in surprise. "Never, not for a single moment. This is civilization, Flynn people caring for each other, living in harmony with the land, teaching the next generation to do better than we did. What more could I want?" Flynn smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with happiness. "Nothing, I suppose, when you put it that way. And you?" Rachel asked. "Do you ever regret rescuing a troublesome bride who turned your peaceful solitude upside down?" Flynn laughed, pulling her close against his side. "The only thing I regret is that I didn't find you sooner." Rachel leaned into his embrace, contentment washing over her. From a bride chained to a stagecoach wheel to a woman fully in possession of her own destiny, it had been an unexpected journey, but one she would choose again without hesitation. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in the same crimson and gold as on that fateful day they had met, Flynn kissed her softly. "She's mine," he whispered against her lips, "and I am hers, now and always." "Now and always," Rachel agreed, her heart full of gratitude for the man who had broken her chains and helped her find not just freedom, but a love deeper and truer than any she could have imagined in her old life. Together they watched the stars emerge, two souls who had found in each other not possession but partnership, not ownership but belonging, a love as vast and enduring as the western sky above them.